Mr. Γκραμένια, thank you very much for speaking to ΕΡΤNews. Καλημέρα.
Καλημέρα.
I will start with the European economy. Christine Lagarde said recently that risks are everywhere, uncertainty is everywhere. As for if we are in a whatever it takes moment, she said that it is for the political leaders to answer. And do you agree with that? And what do you think that European governments should do?
I think it is important to remember on what occasion the sentence "whatever it takes" was pronounced by Christine Lagarde's predecessor, Mario Draghi, back, if I remember correctly, in 2012. He said that because we were facing a financial crisis worldwide, and in particular what was called then the euro crisis. And so there was a risk of huge financial instability inside the euro area. And so the message meant when there's such a risk of financial instability, we have to do measures that are new, that are unheard of. And so the European Central Bank took lots of new measures that had never been done before, and the European Stability Mechanism was created. So we were created to safeguard the euro area. Now, today, when Christine Lagarde mentions whatever it takes, she obviously has in mind war that is now present on the European continent because of the aggression of Russia on Ukraine. So we have a war on the European continent on the doorstep of the European Union. So this is a new phenomenon since 3 years. So that's already very, very worrying. But now, in the last couple of weeks, we have also seen that the support to Ukraine and the support to the allies of Ukraine, that means all the European Union, from the side of the United States, is becoming less certain. So we have a huge geopolitical risks, and I think that's why she refers and makes this comparison with the financial instability risks 15, 20 years ago and the situation today. And what does that call for? Well, in a few words, it calls for more Europe and not less, and especially more action in the field of defense.
You referred to the defense, and European countries should raise defense spendings. Recently, you spoke at the German Association in Luxembourg, and you said that we must rethink Europe's defense and security. You also added that ESM could help. How? Can you be more specific?
So let me first say that we have taken peace for granted in Europe. And with the last 3 years, we finally realize that you cannot have peace at no price. In fact, we are understanding that peace has a price. Now, you in Greece, you're very well aware of it because you are one of the countries that has spent more on defense than most other European countries. You are already above 2% expenditures of GDP, but in many countries we have not taken that sufficient seriously because we were trusting our American ally who has been our main protector for 3 generations. So I think this calls for a European response, a European cooperation, and it's obviously something that will take years and months to be achieved to have a European common defense. Let me say, answering your question, what the ESM can do. Now, first of all, we have to realize, and that's the triggering effect of our reflection, that when you have a war and a threat that is so important like the one of Russia today, it can cause financial instability. And if financial instability is at stake, well, the ESM has to reflect what it could do. So we have an instrument which we call a kind of precautionary credit line, which we had proposed on the occasion of the COVID crisis. And the way that works is that countries could have access to this credit line and would have to commit that they use the funds they lend at the ESM for defense expenditures. So that's what the ESM could do, which is an instrument it has already in its toolkit. And so this is, let's say, a response that is available.
Are you thinking maybe to do some changes to this credit line in order to be more attractive for member states, given the fact that the pandemic crisis support that you had, no member state, if I'm not wrong, used it?
Yes, you're completely right. It was not used because there were lots of other policies in place. Let's remember we had very low interest rates on first. Second, we had a very generous monetary policy. And third, the European Union decided something that was never done before, a kind of solidarity in the Next Generation EU program. So with all these measures and a few others, it was not necessary to use our instrument. But so I think technically speaking, it is available. Let me also remind our listeners and people who watch us that we have a lending capacity or a financing power of more than 400 billion euro. So this is a lot of money, and that's also illustrating the word whatever it takes.
We saw the debt rise to all member states, if I'm not wrong, during the pandemic. And
True.
Now we're expecting to rise more, maybe given the spendings that member states have to do for defense. Are you worried about the sustainability of the debt, especially to the countries that they are high debt?
Yes, this is a discussion which is ongoing. I attended the Eurogroup meeting last Monday and a dinner thereafter, where we discussed what Europe, what the EU can do in terms of freeing some space in the budgets from the side of the member states. And you are right that the countries that have high deficits or a high debt compared to their gross domestic product say we don't have a lot of room of maneuver to push up expenditures. So the answer that's on the table and that the Commission proposed is first to use 150 billion euro, and second to put into place what is called an escape clause, which is an exception to the new Stability and Growth Pact rules that have been put together recently. So that gives, I would say, between quotation marks, room of maneuver, but on the other hand, for markets, that is always that. I mean, you might not account it for against the Stability and Growth Pact. You might escape the excessive deficit procedure, but it's still that. So it will also require for different countries that they have to save money in other places. So change priorities. And when you think of it, defense and security is an absolute priority, which takes over all the rest. So this will be difficult. So in the medium and long term, everybody agrees that sustainability is key. Maybe in the short term, we need to have these exceptions I mentioned, and that's also why I suggested to have a kind of common approach by having ESM coming into play.
Do you worry about the European economies because of tariffs from the United States? And what about growth and inflation?
It is clear that we are entering a new phase in world trade. I mean, in the last 10 years, I would say, we have seen lots of doubts about globalization. So globalization has certainly some drawbacks, some disadvantages, if you want. But now we are coming from a trend of less enthusiasm for global trade. We're coming into a phase where we have hindering of trade. That means obstacles to trade. And that's not good, because obstacles to trade is a lose-lose situation for both sides. And what we are witnessing in the last days and weeks is the escalation. Measures, countermeasures, and for Europe this is obviously bad news. European Union is a world champion in trade. If we look at our trade compared to our global GDP, it represents 60% of our wealth, 60%. So not counting inside EU trade, not counting that. If you look at the same number for China, it is 35%, and for the United States, 25%. So we are far more open than any other area of the world. So if there is an escalation in trade, it will punish Europe more. So it is a very worrying attitude. On the other hand, the Commission, which has an exclusive competence in this field, and this is also the opinion of the member states, we cannot just accept that we get penalties and we get higher tariffs and do nothing. So it is a very complicated situation. And the impact of that will be higher inflation. Because if you add tariffs, prices go up. So it's also a lose-lose, not only for countries, it's a lose-lose for the consumer, because the purchasing power goes down. And you know, if the purchasing power goes down, it's a kind of vicious circle on growth. And so that's bad news, again, for the whole planet.
I will come to the Greek economy. How do you assess the performance of the Greek economy, and what are your main concerns? How could it be shielded against geopolitical risks?
So the Greek economy has performed really well since many years, and in particular now after COVID, your growth has been constantly above 2%, whilst the average of EU countries have only grown around 1%. So double the rate. So I would like to congratulate the Greek ministers who deal with that, but also the companies, because they've become more agile and more effective. The other thing that I would like to underline is that the reforms that were taken and made in the last 10 years are now bearing fruit. And I know that some of these reforms had a very high social cost, and we at the ESM are very much aware of that. But on the other hand, it is good to see that it has borne fruit. And in fact, we have seen that in the other countries where the ESM had done assistance, like Portugal and Spain, for example, also Cyprus. The growth rate in those countries is higher than the average of the European Union. That being said, there's another great news, and that is that the debt compared to the gross domestic product of Greece has constantly been going down, with the exception of the COVID year. And so you have reduced your debt in 6 years by 25%, which is a remarkable result. I think no country has had such a spectacular result. Last but not least, your primary surplus is also quite good. Something that sometimes goes more unnoticed abroad, and that is that also your unemployment has gone down spectacularly. I mean, it used to be above 20%, and in 10 years is now less than half, in single digit. So that's very encouraging, but there's still potential for improvement. I look at the rate of young workers or of women in the economy in Greece is still lower than the average of the European Union. Productivity in Greece is still lower, which is also hampering exports. And so I think there's room of maneuver for improvement. So the more growth you have and the more exports you have, the more you will be able to reduce your debt or have additional room of maneuver for defense expenditures.
You referred to the Greek debt. We know that Greece is planning to proceed with another early repayment of GLF loans, around 5.3 billion euros, within the year. Yeah. Do you still support the Greek authorities on this effort and under which conditions, and to add to this, the amount is planned to be allocated for installments expiring in 2033 until 2041. Do you think that will contribute such a movement to increase the confidence of the investment community?
The answer is yes. Yes to all the questions that you mentioned. If we will agree, well, we need to have the support of all member states, but we and I as managing director will support that demand. So I cannot act and say it will be a yes because I cannot decide it alone, but I will advocate it, and I don't see any reason why member states would object, because this is a sign that your economy is doing well, that your financial situation is improving, and that will be rewarded by rating agencies. And in fact, Greece has now reached, again, investment grade. I mean, this is a great achievement and will attract foreign investors and will strengthen the position of this wonderful country.
And a last question. We are expecting RRF to be completed in 2026. Also, the economic outlook, especially for investments in Greece, is not very optimistic after 2026. How could Greece boost its growth?
I would maybe say two things on this. It's very difficult to read the future in general. Even for the PT in Delphi, it was difficult to read the future. So that has not changed. But we live in very uncertain days, and I think the geopolitical risks, the escalation of trade barriers are really slowing down growth for sure. Point number one. Point number two, we and Greece, like all the other EU countries, should see the Recovery and Resilience Fund, the RRF, as a great opportunity, because half of the funds that you get in the RRF are grants, not loans. So it gives room of maneuver again. And I think for the digital transition and the green transition, and green transition makes me also think that exactly in this program you could boost public transportation, which is very important on the green agenda. And I know that's an area where Greece wants to do more.
Mr. Γκραμένια, thank you very much.
Pleasure.